What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are here with our first 53-man roster prediction for the Detroit Lions. Now, I was planning to do this back at the studio last night, and I kind of did it, but I didn't feel great about it. Like, this is one of those topics where you do it, and then you go to the editing, and you're like, oh, I don't like that. And then you struggle with it for a while. Then you start rewatching the game, and you're like, maybe I should change this. And this is just so difficult to get through that even after posting this video, I'm sure I'm not going to love some of the decisions that I made here in this 53-man roster prediction before our final preseason game this weekend against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I also do plan on doing a second video or maybe a live stream like right after the week 3 preseason game. I'd like to do some sort of updated version of this once we see the final game. But as of now, I've seen this as kind of a trend, like let's predict the 53 before the final game. So let's do it. Let's create some content and let's get it started. Welcome in, everybody, to another video. Glad you guys are here. And today we're going to kind of fly through this a little bit. I got some overlaying graphics that will showcase the players that made the 53-man roster. Also in the top right of the graphics have listed players that just missed the cut for me, guys that were just on the outside looking in that maybe I debated back and forth with. And of course, there's going to be changes, guys that could end up with injury designations that may not count towards the 53. There could absolutely be new players brought along, especially at the receiver position. I think we're all keeping our eye on that. So there's definitely things that can change between now and the 53-man roster cuts. But I'm trying to make this predictive. So this is a predictive 53, not necessarily like all of the things that I would do. I think there's a nice balance between it, but I really try to lean towards, if I was predicting right now what the Lions will do, this is what I think they will do. And I'll talk through some of the moves that maybe I would prefer, but let's dive right into it. Let's waste no more time. Let's start off on the offensive side of the ball at quarterback. Let's keep it simple. We got two of them. It's Jared Goff and Hendon Hooker. I'm keeping both of those quarterbacks. I have Hendon Hooker as my number 2 quarterback, and I feel good about that right now, that he could step in and perform as our backup quarterback. I think the Lions do like Nate Sudfeld, and I don't think it's completely off the table that they would think that they could keep 3 quarterbacks still, especially if they're not extremely confident that Sudfeld does get back. They gave him $300K guaranteed this offseason, but I also love the idea of having Nate Sudfeld as kind of the emergency quarterback within the practice squad role. So I think that would be ideal. It'd be ideal if that could be the case for the Lions. Doesn't sound like we're going to see Jake Fromm, so we're going to see Nate Sudfeld again this weekend because Jake Fromm just isn't getting reps in practice just because of time reasons. So I think they like Nate Sudfeld. I think it's still on the board, but I also think from what I've seen from Hendon Hooker as a fan personally, I'm confident that if he had to step into a game, that he would be prepared to do so. You may have to minimize certain things that you ask of him, but I'd be pretty confident of him stepping in as number 2 quarterback and that he would be ready to handle that responsibility if he had to. So for me, I feel comfortable with going with 2 quarterbacks as of now. Maybe that changes after week 3, but I'm comfortable with that. Then hopefully we can get Sudfeld, or maybe it's a different quarterback, back on the practice squad to become that emergency quarterback for the Lions. Again, I don't think 3 is out of the question, but man, going through the 53 was incredibly difficult because I didn't realize how many positions you feel like, ooh, that guy's a lock, that's a lock. And then all of a sudden you're like, I don't really have much flexibility here because I don't see a path where they actually cut this player. But moving on to the next positional group, I have my first bold move, and I don't like doing any of these, to be honest. Like, if I didn't have to cut any of these players, I wouldn't. But let's go to running back, where I don't have Craig Reynolds on the final 53-man roster, and I don't like doing that. I'm a huge fan of Craig. I think that, of course, versatility's there. Always had the pass catching background, and now we're seeing it really show up. I think he's shown up pretty well in the first 2 preseason games, and he's had such limited reps. It makes me feel like the Lions would love to keep Craig Reynolds around, and maybe he's not really on the bubble like that. However, for me, with the emergence of Sione Vaki keeping 4 running backs, I just struggled with that when I kind of worked my way through it, and we'll talk about that in the next positional group. So I just decided to go with 3. We did this back in 2022 with Gibbs, Monty, and at that time it was Craig Reynolds, but now it's Sione Vaki. And also because of the depth that we've seen at running back, Bam Knight, the way that he stepped up in last week's preseason game, having Jake Funk, who's been pretty reliable as well, pass protection, pass catching, and with his vision, maybe you can at least get one of these guys back on the practice squad. I don't think you're incredibly confident you can get Craig back, which is really the biggest concern here, but as you'll see in the next positional group, that was kind of the balance game that I had to play. However, I'm going to roll with 3. My biggest concern here is really the fact that you have Jahmyr Gibbs nursing the hamstring injury, and you're only coming in with 3 running backs. I think you'd want to have a little bit more depth than that, but again, we've seen something like this happen before, and because of Vaki's special teams upside, I think that could also create flexibility here as well. Plus, like we'll see at the receiver position, when you have a guy that can also kick return, may leave you some room to not keep Craig Reynolds around. I don't want to do this. I'm rooting for Craig. I really could see a path where he makes it, but I felt like I had to make one bold move somewhere, and the initial one that I made, I didn't love. I kept talking myself through, and I was like, I got to get him on the roster somehow, so I had to, unfortunately, make this decision with Craig Reynolds. We'll see. I'm not rooting for this to happen. It's just that's what happened for this 53-man roster. Hopefully, we could get him back on the practice squad in this scenario because I'd love to keep Craig Reynolds around, but this is also leaving out guys like Jermar Jefferson, who I'm a massive fan of, and maybe you get Jefferson back on the practice squad. Like, I think there's a lot of guys, maybe you lose them all, but I think there's enough where you feel like we can get a few of these guys potentially back on the practice squad, maybe protect a couple of them at week after week after week to maintain that depth, rather than risking this at other positions where getting that player back may be extremely difficult. And that moves me on to the offensive line. Now, this is the one that has kind of the little nuance trick to it. I don't want to say trick, but we have Christian Mahogany listed on the NFI list, which if he goes into and through the final 53-man roster cuts on the NFI list, I believe he'll have to miss the first 4 games of the season before he can return. And I think the Lions would be okay with that being the case with Mahogany. But since we haven't seen anything of him and we really don't have updates, like for example, Penei Sewell, sounds good. Sounds like he just rolled an ankle. He's going to be okay. Dan Skipper next week. Malcolm Rodriguez next week. Because we have some of these positive updates, but we really don't have any update on Mahogany because he's on the NFI list, I didn't know what to do with Mahogany here. Like, if he's here, I feel like he'll make the team. But since he's not, I don't have an update. I think it may be very likely that he could just end up on the NFI list to begin the season. If that's the case, it could actually work out well for the Lions to give them that buffer, have him now count towards the 53, but also still give them some interior offensive line depth when he works his way back. It could also open up a possibility to potentially look at this and say we can go a little bit lighter on the interior, because if we can get Mahogany back after a few weeks, then all of a sudden, it's okay that we're a little bit lighter at guard or center into the initial 53-man roster cuts. But this was the position I struggled with the most. The first time I went through this, I kept the Lions with 9 offensive linemen and really only 1 true interior offensive lineman. Of course, guys like Sorstal can step in and play guard. He wasn't great there last year. The Lions have clearly said, hey, we want you playing right tackle. He played every snap last week in the preseason. Dan Skipper played a little bit of left guard last season, but he handles left tackle. Manu has handled left tackle for us. So our only real true interior offensive lineman I initially kept was Michael Neese. There's flexibility there. He gets center reps in practice, even though he's mainly been our right guard in the preseason. That's mainly been his position. I like him because he's scheme versatile. In the zone scheme, the gap scheme, I think he's versatile in that sense. As a pass protector, he's been a good pass protector through both of his first 2 preseason games. So I think that flexibility along with the versatility makes Michael Neese a very good option for the Lions to keep around, while also giving some safety flexibility in the case that you had to go that direction. But I still didn't feel great about really only having 1 true interior offensive lineman when both your guards are veteran guards. Like, these are not young guards. So I wanted to keep somebody else around here. And it really came down to 2 players for me. The 2 players at the top of my list for me were Brian Hudson, the undrafted free agent out of Louisville, who's been basically our 3rd string center, who I think has performed really well. He's shown a lot of flexibility. He's actually ran block pretty well. He's created some movement for the Lions. And in pass protection, he's been good. He's been good. He's played with good awareness. He's played fast to give help in different situations. And he's been able to help us on combo blocks. He's been able to get out in outside zones. I really like Brian Hudson. I think Brian Hudson is absolutely knocking on the door. Could be some of the reason that a guy like Michael Neese is getting those center reps in practice to see if they need to go that direction, because I think Michael Neese is absolutely in play. But it came down between him and KO'd, and I ended up going with KO'd. And a lot of this swung for me by going back to the first preseason game where KO'd stepped in at right guard against the New York Giants for us, and I thought he performed arguably even better planted at right guard. He's mainly been playing at left guard. He hasn't been perfect, right? He's had some ugly losses as the rep kind of unfolds, but we know with KO'd is that he has a strong anchor. He wins early. That man has tree trunks as arms, and he can also create some movement as a run blocker as well, just moving guys off the line of scrimmage, not consistently playing behind the line of scrimmage, which a lot of the depth at the interior offensive line seemingly does. He's not the best up to the second level. Like, as a puller, he doesn't have the best movement skills, or as a zone blocker, he doesn't have some of the reactive athleticism, but he typically plays with some control, and he can hit with pretty good angles as well. KO has some limited upside, but he's continuing to get better and better here, and because he has both guard flexibility, I just struggle to not put him on the 53-man roster. Like, if this was, later during the season and you didn't have KO'd, it'd be extremely difficult to find a guard that you can trust. We've seen the Lions kind of go through that, like trying to plug different guards. And I think for the Lions, they may not want to risk losing a guy like KO'd by cutting him and trying to get one of these guys back on the practice squad. And instead just saying, you know what, let's stick with him. He's been reliable. He can play both guard spots. He's improved. Let's make sure, because to be honest, if we needed him to step into a game week 2, the first guy up absolutely could be KO'd over Michael Neese. Michael Neese gives you some center flexibility, which KO doesn't, but it could be KO'd who's up first. And I think for the Lions, they want to have that flexibility. So clearly we're going extremely deep on the offensive line here because I got Dan Skipper, who can win early, but of course plays a little bit tall, struggles a little bit with recovery. But I think they like Skipper, 6th offensive lineman. You know, when they go to some of their heavier personnel packages, their jumbo packages, I think you're going to want to keep Dan Skipper around. I think that they will. Also, Giovanni Manu, who I just don't think is really someone that you want to play ideally this year. But Giovanni Manu, to me, is going to make the 53. It was great to see him progress in his pass game, especially as a pass protector. But I could see a real scenario where he's just one of those guys that are usually inactive. Like, he's on the 53, but he's constantly inactive for the Lions. It would make sense that he would be one of those players. And then, of course, you have Colby Sorstel, who, again, sticking him at right tackle, wanting to continue to give him reps there. I don't see a scenario where he doesn't make the team. He has guard flexibility, but with them really diving into let's play him at right tackle this offseason, I don't think that they love it. And that's why I went a little bit heavier on the interior offensive line depth. So for me, it was KO'd versus Hudson. I'm excited to see that play out. I think Clemens potentially could be still in the mix there. And Burnt helped himself a lot last week. But to me, I ended up going with KO'd Mr. Reliable. Do I want to call him now? Call him Mr. Reliable for the offensive line. Let's continue on, though, because now at receiver, again, a very tricky situation. And I kind of just had to rely on what my beliefs were going back to my initial 53-man roster to figure out what I want to do with wide receiver 5. Strong part of me said, you know what? Just keep 4 receivers. Keep Craig Reynolds around. And honestly, I think that's a reasonable thing to make a case for. I think it's very possible Lions go out and add a receiver, whether that's trade or free agency, and this thing changes completely. That being said, though, with what we know right now, what we have right now, I ended up going with 5 receivers. And those 5 receivers include Khalif Raymond, St. Brown, Jameis Williams, the locks on this team. Then Isaiah Williams. I'm going to call him wide receiver 4. I think Isaiah Williams, he is a separator level 1, and he's opening that up into level 2. And I think when you have that specifically against man coverage, there is a value in that within this offense. Guys that can separate against man coverage, even if it's level 1 and level 2. It's not as much vertically down the field. He's also shown us big time run after catch ability. It's been better than I expected coming out of the draft. Not elite, but better than I expected coming out of the draft there. And he's produced more than any other receiver in each of his first 2 games. He had the muff punt, but he also had the big return that set up the game-winning field goal. I think Isaiah Williams is just taking advantage of so many opportunities here. And I also think that he was a guy that was worthy of being a draft pick. I mean, if he had a 6th or 7th round draft pick just put to his name, I don't think there were any doubt that Isaiah Williams is making this team at this point. Be like, yeah, that guy's making the team. It's just that he's not. He's an undrafted free agent that there could be questions. But for me, I almost view him as a draft pick because I thought that he was better than certain guys that got drafted toward the end of the draft. But either way, Isaiah Williams is here and he's on my 53. At number 5, I'm going to go with Donovan Peoples-Jones. And I struggled with this one. There was a couple players that I kind of went back and forth with here. Of course, you have guys like Tom Kennedy, who we've talked about. I think Fountain helped himself a lot last week. I thought he looked a lot better last week. And then Caden Davis, who I still don't want to count out yet because I thought he blocked much better last week. He definitely has special teams value. And I do think he's one of the more polished route runners, though I don't think he consistently separates at all levels of the field. But you could say some similar things about Peoples-Jones as well. There's certain routes in his route tree that he just doesn't really separate on. Like we saw it in week 1 on some of the comeback routes. That dude was just locked up. And it was like, yeah, he's not going to separate at the top of the route, sinking down, getting away from guys. That's just not his game. But he can run a curl and box you out. The Lions continue to use him in red zone drills in practice with the first team, seeing if they can open up that possibility within his game. He's been very unproductive throughout the preseason. I heard yesterday he had 1 reception, back shoulder on 3rd down, had a drop pass on a 3rd down as well. He's been very unproductive in the preseason. Not all his fault, but his route tree is definitely limited, but it also separates himself from a lot of the other receivers we have in that room because of what his route tree is. 15-yard dig route that the Lions can open up. The long-witted separate away from you, right? Using my long speed, that ability to continuously gain separation, the sideline toe tapping ability, the red zone ability, which we haven't really seen opened up, but we know it's in there. The underneath, being able to create some separation, really through physicality, right? Knocking you off balance, staying balanced myself, and creating some tight window throws. So it's been a very small sample size with Peoples-Jones. This is probably more so based on practice and my evaluation than what he's done in the preseason. But as of now, I'm going to put Peoples-Jones on the 53. I don't know that he'll be there all season, but I'm going to put him on the 53, and I'm going to feel good about the different body type that he adds to that room. The tight end. At tight end, again, very difficult decision here. And this one I flipped actually from what I initially had, which is Laporta, Brock Wright, locks to make the team. But my number 3 tight end I'm going to go with is Shane Zylstra. I initially put James Mitchell here. I liked what I had seen from James Mitchell. I thought James Mitchell was showing some separation ability. Now, James Mitchell definitely separates differently than Shane Zylstra. They definitely have 2 different body types. Shane's a little bit more lean, a little bit more shake in his routes. You feel like you can get a little little bit more complex versatility there. James Mitchell, who separates a little bit more with physicality, definitely has still some of that vertical speed, and we saw him create 2 run-after-catch opportunities on both of receptions in the preseason. I like what I've seen from Mitchell. This one felt very difficult, felt very tight between both of these 2 players. But then Shane Zylstra on the other end, who, maybe has felt a little bit less of an impact within the passing game throughout the preseason, had a flat last week that he caught but was tripped up, picked up 5 yards on a 2nd and 10. But with Shane Zylstra, neither of these guys have been asked to pass protect a ton when it comes to the regular season. There are spots of it, and I've always liked James Mitchell there. Don't think he's been perfect in the preseason, however. But when I look at Shane Zylstra in run blocking, where we see, them being asked a little bit more impactful for the Lions, I think James Mitchell's had some really standout reps there, especially on the backside, his ability to create movement. That guy is he's pretty much a brick wall at the point of attack. That dude is really strong, wide base. Shane Zylstra built a little bit leaner than that, but Shane, the way that he's worked, the movement that he's created on some of his run blocking opportunities, I just lean towards Shane Zylstra because I can't help feel, but like Shane Zylstra has just improved in a lot of different areas since he's been here, and he's just gotten better and better. He continues to work his butt off. He's got special teams value for us, and I also think that there is maybe more man coverage, specifically just route separation upside with Shane Zylstra than James Mitchell. Again, I think it's very tight. They're definitely 2 different body types. I could really go either way here, but I'm going to roll with Shane Zylstra. He's continued to improve. I like his separation upside just a little bit more in man coverage, and we just haven't seen the production from really either of these guys within the preseason. But then I also like what he's done in the way that he's improved as a blocker. Plus, having Parker Hesse, who has done really well as a blocker, lead blocker, he's actually played more snaps in line than he has in the backfield. So even though I list him as a fullback because that's his role, he's done both. So he also still adds some versatility to that room. If you just want a guy to stand in and pass protect, you could probably go with Parker Hesse. And then if you want a guy like Shane Zylstra who can go out there and separate, then you have your guy. So very difficult between these 2. I just went with Shane Zylstra as a predictive 53-man roster move. All right, let's move on to the defensive side of the ball here, because I feel like for most of these positions, there's just a lot of locks, and it's like, yep, that makes sense. Defensive line starting there first, it is absolutely loaded. First off, Josh Paschal, Mekhi Wingo. Again, don't really worry about how I'm grouping these 2 together, but Josh Paschal, Mekhi Wingo, to me, both locks to make the team. Wingo's done a lot of work in the interior. I love how technically he's seemingly settled in there, and he has that ability to get an edge and give you some production as a pass rusher, give you a little bit of pocket collapsing ability. He can get upfield. And then you have Josh Paschal, who played a lot in this last game, showed some interior pass rush success, but also at defensive end, he still looked like Josh Paschal of old. A lot of the things that you like, the ability to create knockback, walkback. He's a straight pocket collapser, opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. Now, he'll probably come in this year as your backup, but because of the inside-outside flexibility, he can find his way onto the field for the Lions. I'm a big Josh Paschal guy, and I think from the interior is where he could be his most impactful consistently as a pass rusher, but as a run defender, I still really like what you're getting there, and I thought last year he took big leaps. Then you have at nose tackle, we're going to go with Kyle Pecco, who hasn't really played in the preseason, but we're going to lock him in. Kind of feels like the safety blanket for Brian Martin, who's going to give you some much better flashes so far this preseason, but also still some that's not great. Feeling like some plays are just kind of slow in terms of awareness, getting to where he needs to be. And then, of course, you have DJ Reader leading that room when he hopefully gets back. I'm going to say he's on the 53-man roster. Hopefully that's the case. Again, these things could change. He's on the 53-man roster, and he holds it down right next to Aleem McNeil with Levi Onwuzurike. And again, the flexibility that you get here with not only Aleem, but also now Levi, who can play defensive end, another straight pocket collapser. Like, he's another guy we haven't really seen in the preseason. Usually, this is the time for Levi. It's like, let's see what Levi's got. We're not even seeing him. Levi's making this team, and it's almost like, hey, let's just make sure we get in the season with this guy healthy. He's still producing in practice. We're hearing he had a sack yesterday. So I really like this defensive line. It feels like all of these guys are pretty well-known locks for the Lions, which is a crazy place to be at, but that's where we're at, and this room just looks nasty across the board. I love the flexibility, the versatility, and also the depth here, but also growth opportunities for guys like Martin. Then at edge, I'm listing this as edge, but there's some flexibility here. We have Aiden Hutchinson and Marcus Davenport. Those two, again, are locks. I'm assuming we're going to see those guys play opposite each other a ton. I think Davenport's going to earn an extension right after the season because I think he's going to have that big of a year for the Lions. Then obviously you have Hutchinson. And then beyond that, it was how many did I want to keep here? And this was the other battle, which is the one that I'm really watching for week 3 because I don't think anything's been decided. I think James Houston is still alive in this competition. He goes out there in week 3, puts up 3+ pressures. He looks like the best pass rusher, which you could still make the case he's a better pass rusher than Isaac Ukwu, Matthew Betts, Mitchell Igude. You could still easily make that case Houston is better than all 3 of those guys as a pass rusher. And even in his first preseason game, he did still show some good there. It was just everything in terms of the sandbacker role, which playing off-ball linebacker, dropping into coverage, things just looked like there was some false steps. Things just didn't look as fast. He didn't look as fluid. Dan Campbell said that, he was dealing with an injury. So for him, it's just a weird spot because we didn't see him last week. I don't want to count Houston out. I still think he's in play, and I think he can go out there and prove me wrong. I don't want to cut Houston, so please, Houston, go out there and ball out because I would love to keep you around. I know if he does, he's immediately going to get scooped up. I don't see a shot that he gets back to the practice squad, but I'm leaning because of my prediction here with Matthew Betts, who last week to me showed a lot of flexibility. Again, playing some of the sandbacker, playing off ball for the Lions. Of course, rushing the passer, setting the edge is not great for him, but I don't think it's great for James Houston either, for example. And Isaac Ukwu is solid in that category, but Isaac Ukwu to me has somewhat of a ceiling as a pass rusher. Though he knows how he wins, I think Ukwu's been much better than any of the way that he's been graded. Even if you look at his pressure stats, which aren't really there in the preseason, I still really like his long arm move, his spot collapsing ability, the second effort. I love the rips. And for Matthew Betts, while there's limitations to win the top of the rush, of course, he's a little bit different athletically. He has the juice off the line. He has some coverage dropping flexibility. I just think what he showed last week in terms of that flexibility and even some of the flashes that he had, of course, the sack on the stunt, the inside move, which was immediate. But even with some of the limitations here, I think showing that flexibility could be enough to set him apart from the rest of these guys, especially if he puts together a really nice week 3, because I'm sure he'll get a lot of snaps. I think this is one of those positions that are completely wide open still, and it's not even a lock that any of these guys make the team. I think that's still a real possibility that none of them make the team. But as of now, I'm going to go with Matthew Betts. Bet on what I saw this past game. I didn't love it. I didn't think he was outstanding, and I talked about that after the game, as much as expectations that I had, but I still thought it was a very much so a step in the right direction, and as of now, I'm going to put Matthew Betts on the 53. That moves me on to really off-ball linebacker, but there's some flexibility here. Of course, Alex Anzalone, Jack Campbell leading the way at off-ball linebacker. But then the depth. And the tough one here is Malcolm, because we really haven't seen him. Hoping that he gets back here soon, and then we'll be able to get him out here. I still think he's going to make the team. That's just a tricky one right now, because I guess if there was a surprise, maybe it could be Malcolm, just because we're not seeing him. But a big reason for that would be because I keep Ben Neiman. I think Ben Neiman's earned this based on the preseason. From what I've seen, Ben Neiman's been reliable. He's been a good run defender. We know he's good at zone coverage. We know he hits his landmarks. We know he knows how to plaster routes. He's just a smart linebacker, and him alongside Jalen has been just so fun to watch. So I wanted to keep him around with Jalen Reeves-Maybin, and then of course we're going to keep Malcolm Rodriguez here as well. There's definitely flexibility in this room. We saw Campbell last year play some of the sandbacker role. So again, there's a chance that Betts, Ukwu, none of those guys make the team. But because of the flexibility with guys like Levi, Pascal, I went with more of the athletic, versatile piece of Matthew Betts. And then at off-ball backer, I think, these are just a lot of really good off-ball linebackers, and hopefully we can get a few of these back to the practice squad, like Ty Summers, for example. Then at cornerback, one of the easier ones for me, the first 4, again, feel like locks of Meek, Terrion, Enos, Carlton Davis. Carlton had a pick yesterday, jumped the flat route. But then I'm also going to throw Khalil Dorsey in here. I don't think Kendall Vildor's far off, and if they go with 6, I think Vildor's next up. I don't think he's far off, but I'm going to lean with Khalil Dorsey personally. I just have loved what I've seen in training camp. I love his one-on-one ability in coverage. I love the athleticism that he brings as well, and also some of the plays that he's made against the run. Vildor does a lot of the same. He's very consistent against the run. He really contests a lot of the throws. He had a really good week against Kansas City outside of the one vertical pass that he got beat on in the corner route. Outside of that, he played a really good game, contested a lot of things. Kendall Vildor did a really nice job. But for me personally, I personally have a slight lean towards Khalil Dorsey over Vildor. But if they keep both, it would make a ton of sense to me. I like both of these guys. I'm just going to go with Kendall at this spot, and we're going to go with 5 cornerbacks. Because we're a little bit lighter there, though, we got to go a little bit deeper at safety. And here's probably maybe the shock to make the roster, but he was on my initial 53 when we predicted on Bleacher Report. And that is that the first 4 are easy for me, right? Brandon Joseph, Ife Melifonwu, Kirby Joseph, and also Brian Branch. Brian Branch's flexibility stepped down the nickel as he did yesterday in some of the sub-package looks, and then just step in Brandon Joseph allows me to go a little bit lighter at cornerback. But then also, because of that, I wanted to have a little bit more depth at safety. So I'm going to keep Lauren Strickland around. A lot of this is special teams value I think could really be there. I love him playing downhill. He's shown us a lot of slot flexibility, though I would have some concerns in straight man-to-man coverage during the regular season. In zone coverage, he's hit his landmarks well. He's found his spots. He looks twitchy and changed direction. He is extremely willing to step down and tackle and hit somebody. And that position flexibility / special teams ability, I think could be enough here to keep him around. Is just one of those guys that you feel like can play in a lot of different positions. He is just a football basketball player. That's just as simple as it. Lawrence Strickland just plays football, man. He plays it at a high level, and he's fun to watch. I'm going to keep Lawrence Strickland around. I'm going to rock with my initial 53-man roster prediction here. Go a little bit deeper at safety to hold some of that flexibility with guys like Iffy and Brian Branch if we ever need to step them down. So that is your defensive outlook, and obviously you don't have CJ Moore there, which is a tricky one. But then finally, we have the special teams, and on special teams, we're going to go with Jack Fox, who kicked a 671-yard punt in the air last week. Jake Bates, we got our kicker, and then also Hogan Hatton. That's right, the first long snapper to play in this past game against the Kansas City Chiefs. I love his ability to defend after snapping on in punt coverage. I love that ability, right, to get upfield. He's obviously played some linebacker snaps. He's got a linebacker background. Don't expect much of that here, but Dan Campbell called this a real competition, and from what I've seen, Hogan Hatton apparently had one that hit the ground, or it was a bad snap yesterday, led to a missed field goal. So a lot of this could be based on what we haven't seen. This one kind of feels like I'm flipping a coin, but I'm going to roll with Hogan Hatton here with some of the athleticism and what I saw in the last preseason game. It does feel like, though, the concern could be his snap process needs to be a little bit faster. He's got to get it back to the holder a little bit faster. But outside of that, I really do like his coverage ability for the Lions. So I'm going to go with the versatile Hogan Hatton to wrap this thing up. So there you go. That is my initial 53-man roster prediction pre our final preseason game. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll definitely be back probably with a live stream to update this after week 3. But for now, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, Brad, for watching, and I'm out.